The text flashed across my phone screen, making my stomach drop. Payment declined. I stared at it in disbelief, my hands starting to shake. This had to be a mistake. I had just checked the business account yesterday. There should have been more than enough to cover this month's rent for my cafe. My name is Emma Chen, and at 32, I thought I had finally escaped the shadow of my father-in-law's disapproval. For 3 years, I poured everything into building Sweet Dreams Café from scratch. My savings, my time, my heart. The cozy coffee shop had become my sanctuary, a place where I could prove that I was more than just the immigrant's daughter who trapped Richard into marriage, as my father-in-law loved to say behind my back. I quickly logged into my business banking app, my fingers trembling as I entered the password. The balance that greeted me made my blood run cold. $47.32. Just yesterday, there had been over $15,000 in that account, money needed for rent, supplies, and employee payroll. This couldn't be happening. As I scrolled through the transaction history, my confusion turned to horror. A series of large transfers had been made in the early hours of the morning, draining nearly everything. All authorized with proper credentials, all perfectly legal on paper. But I hadn't made those transfers. The only other person with access to the account was... My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Gerald Matthews, my father-in-law. My office. Now. The drive to Matthews International Trading felt like walking to the gallows. Gerald's company occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown high-rise. A testament to the empire he'd built from nothing, as he never tired of reminding everyone. The security guard barely glanced at me as I made my way to the executive elevator. After 5 years of marriage to Richard, they all knew who I was, even if they shared their boss's obvious disdain. Gerald's office was exactly what you'd expect, all dark wood and leather, designed to intimidate. He sat behind his massive desk, not bothering to look up from his computer as I entered. At 65, he still cut an imposing figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, with steel gray hair and cold blue eyes that could freeze hell itself. "Sit," he commanded, finally deigning to acknowledge my presence. I remained standing. "What did you do to my business account?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. He smiled then, a cold, satisfied smile that made my skin crawl. "I protected my family's interests. Did you really think I'd let you keep bleeding my son dry with that little vanity project of yours?" "What are you talking about? Sweet Dreams is profitable. I haven't taken a penny from Richard in over 2 years. The cafe had been doing well, building a loyal customer base. We weren't getting rich, but we were growing steadily." Gerald's laugh was sharp and cruel. "Please, I've seen the books. That place is a money pit, and my son is too blinded by whatever spell you've cast on him to see it. So I did what any responsible father would do. I put an end to it." My mind raced. The books? How had he seen my financial records? Then it hit me. Richard's cousin Marcus worked at the bank where I had my business accounts. Of course, Gerald had used that connection to spy on me. "What you did was illegal," I said, my voice stronger now as anger began to replace shock. "I'll go to the police." "Go ahead," he sneered, leaning back in his chair. "I'm sure they'll be very interested in how you've been mismanaging funds, mixing personal and business expenses." Marcus was quite thorough in documenting everything. Who do you think they'll believe? A pillar of the business community trying to protect his son, or the gold digger running a failing cafe? I felt the blood drain from my face. He had planned this perfectly, laying the groundwork to make me look like the villain. Any investigation would find just enough irregularities to cast doubt on my side of the story. He knew exactly how to work the system. Why? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Why now, after all this time? Gerald stood, walking around his desk to tower over me. "Because you need to learn your place. I let this little fantasy of yours go on long enough, hoping you fail on your own. But you're more stubborn than I gave you credit for. So consider this a lesson in reality. You'll never amount to anything in this town. Not without my approval." I thought of my employees, Sarah, who was putting herself through college, and Tom, who had 2 kids to support. They were counting on their paychecks. The vendors who trusted me to pay on time. The customers who had made Sweet Dreams part of their daily routine. "You're not just hurting me," I said quietly. "There are people who depend on that business." He waved his hand dismissively. "Collateral damage. They'll find other jobs. And you," his smile turned cruel again, You can go back to being what you really are, a trophy wife who should be grateful she married above her station. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The fear and shock crystallized into something harder, colder. I thought of my parents, immigrants who had worked themselves to the bone to give me opportunities they never had. They hadn't raised me to break in the face of bullies, no matter how powerful. I met Gerald's gaze steadily. "Thank you," I said, my voice calm. He blinked, clearly thrown by my response. "For what?" "For showing me exactly who you are. And for teaching me a valuable lesson about trust." I turned to leave, then paused at the door. "But you've taught me something else too, that you're afraid of me. Otherwise, you wouldn't have gone to all this trouble." His face darkened. "Get out of my office. And don't bother crying to Richard about this. He knows better than to cross me when it comes to business decisions." I didn't respond, just walked out with my head held high. In the elevator, I finally let out a shaky breath, my mind already racing with possibilities. Gerald thought he had won, that he had finally put me in my place. He had no idea what he had just unleashed. The next morning, I arrived early at Sweet Dreams to face my employees. Sarah was already there, concern etched on her young face. "Emma, my paycheck bounced," she said as soon as I walked in. "Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath. "No, it's not. But I'm going to fix it. Can you gather everyone in the back? We need to talk." 20 minutes later, I stood before my small team, 6 people who had helped build this place from nothing. I told them everything. Gerald's sabotage, the drained accounts, all of it. "I understand if you want to look for other jobs," I finished. "I can't guarantee when I'll be able to make this right." To my surprise, Tom spoke up first. "My last boss was a real piece of work, treated us like dirt. You've always had our backs, Emma. We're not abandoning ship just because some rich jerk is throwing his weight around." The others nodded in agreement. Sarah stepped forward, her expression determined. "What's the plan? Because I know you have one." I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with coffee. "I do, but it's going to take time, and it's going to be risky. Are you sure you want to be part of this?" They were. One by one, they pledged to stick with me, even when I explained that I could only pay them a fraction of their usual wages for a while. It wasn't just loyalty, it was defiance against what Gerald represented, the kind of power that thought it could crush smaller dreams at will. That night, I finally told Richard everything. We sat in our kitchen, the remains of takeout growing cold between us as I laid out his father's actions. I watched his face carefully, looking for any sign that Gerald had been right about his loyalty. "I'll talk to him," Richard said finally, running a hand through his dark hair. "Make him see reason. He can't just." "No," I cut him off. "I don't want you involved in this. Your father made it clear he sees this as a test of your loyalty to him. I won't put you in that position." Richard's face twisted with frustration. "Emma, he stole from you, threatened you. I can't just stand by." "Yes, you can," I said firmly, "because I need you to. Your father is expecting me to run crying to you, to create a rift between you. I won't give him that satisfaction. This is my fight." He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "What are you going to do?" I squeezed his hand. "The less you know, the better. Just trust me." The next few weeks were a blur of activity. During the day, I kept Sweet Dreams running on a shoestring budget, working double shifts to cover gaps in staffing. But it was what I did at night that really mattered. I reached out to every contact I had made in 3 years of running the cafe. Suppliers, regular customers, other small business owners. Word spread quickly about what Gerald Matthews had done, and I was surprised to discover how many people had their own stories about his cutthroat tactics. One of those people was James Chen, no relation, who owned a small but successful chain of bubble tea shops. He had refused to sell his prime locations to Gerald's company a year ago, and had weathered a similar campaign of harassment. "The thing about men like Matthews," James told me over coffee one evening, "is that they think small business owners are easy targets. They forget that we survive because we're adaptable." He was right. Gerald might have stolen my money, but he couldn't take away my relationships with customers, my knowledge of the business, or my determination to succeed. More importantly, he had no idea what I had learned in 3 years of running Sweet Dreams. I had discovered something fascinating about downtown office workers. They were creatures of habit, especially when it came to their morning coffee. And Matthews International Trading, with its hundreds of employees, had very specific habits indeed. Every morning, their break room was stocked with coffee and pastries from an expensive catering service, one that charged 3 times what I did for inferior products. I knew because their employees often complained about it while buying their afternoon pick-me-up from my cafe. It was time to put that knowledge to use. I approached the catering company's owner with a proposal. I would take over their Matthews International contract for 60% of what they were charging and handle all deliveries personally. They agreed readily, happy to offload a demanding client. The next step was trickier. I knew Gerald would never approve if he knew I was involved. So I created a new company, Morning Glory Catering, and listed it under Sarah's name. She was happy to help, especially when I promised her a stake in the business. For 2 weeks, we delivered coffee and pastries to Matthews International without anyone realizing who was really behind it. The employees loved the improved quality, and word started spreading about the new catering service. But I hadn't stopped there. Remember those contacts I mentioned? Turns out a lot of Gerald's business associates had been looking for an excuse to work with someone else. One by one, I approached them through Morning Glory, offering better service at better prices. By the end of the month, we had contracts with 6 other companies in the same building. The profit margins were slim, but it was enough to start rebuilding my emergency fund. More importantly, it gave me a foothold in a world Gerald thought he controlled completely. Then came the next phase of my plan. Gerald's first hint that something was wrong came about 6 weeks after our confrontation. He was in a board meeting when his assistant interrupted with an urgent message. The longtime supplier for international shipping had decided not to renew their contract with Matthews International. I wasn't there, of course, but Sarah's cousin worked in accounting at Matthews, and she told me all about Gerald's explosion when he found out they were switching to a competitor. A competitor who, coincidentally, had just signed an exclusive catering contract with Morning Glory. It was just the beginning. One by one, small but crucial business relationships began slipping away from Gerald's grasp. Companies he had bullied and strong-armed for years suddenly found better options. Nothing dramatic enough to seriously damage Matthews International, but enough to create constant, irritating disruptions. Meanwhile, Sweet Dreams was undergoing a transformation. I had used my catering profits to renovate the space, making it more modern and inviting. But the real changes were happening behind the scenes. Remember James Chen, the bubble tea shop owner? He introduced me to a network of small business owners who had all faced similar treatment from Gerald over the years. Together, we formed what we jokingly called the Resistance, a mutual support system that helped each other with supplies, staffing, and most importantly, information. I gestured for him to come inside, keeping my expression neutral. Coffee. He ignored the offer, pacing the empty cafe like a caged animal. What did you say to Continental Shipping? I began my morning routine, preparing the espresso machine for the day. I haven't said anything to anyone. I've been too busy running my failing business. One morning, about 3 months after Gerald had drained my accounts, I arrived at Sweet Dreams to find him waiting outside. He looked different, tired, irritated, his usually immaculate suit slightly rumpled. "We need to talk," he said as soon as I unlocked the door. "Don't play games with me," he snapped. They specifically mentioned ethical business practices when they terminated our contract. Someone has been talking. I shrugged, measuring coffee beans with careful precision. Maybe they just decided to work with someone who shares their values. His face reddened. "Is that what this is about? You're trying to get revenge?" "Revenge?" I looked up, meeting his gaze steadily. "No, Gerald. I'm just doing business. Isn't that what you taught me? That everything is fair in business?" Before he could respond, the door chimed as Sarah arrived for her shift. She froze momentarily when she saw Gerald, then straightened her spine and walked past him without acknowledgement. "Morning, Emma," she said cheerfully. "The Morning Glory deliveries are all set for today. We landed 3 new contracts yesterday." I hid my smile as Gerald's head snapped up. "Morning Glory?" he demanded. "What's Morning Glory?" "Just a small catering company," I said casually. "Nothing you need to worry about. Now, if you'll excuse me, we're about to open." He stood there for a moment, his face a storm of emotions. Finally, he turned and stormed out, nearly colliding with Tom arriving for his shift. As soon as he was gone, Sarah turned to me with a grin. "Did you see his face when I mentioned Morning Glory? He has no idea." I nodded, feeling a mix of satisfaction and determination. And he won't, not until it's too late. The next few weeks were a delicate dance. Gerald, now suspicious, began investigating Morning Glory catering. But Sarah's name was clean, and all the paperwork was impeccable. More importantly, his own employees loved the service so much that any attempt to change vendors would have caused an uproar. Meanwhile, I was putting the final pieces of my plan into place. Through my network of small business owners, I had learned something interesting. Gerald's company was preparing to bid on a massive international shipping contract, one that would give them a monopoly on certain trade routes. What he didn't know was that one of the key decision-makers on the contract committee was a regular at Sweet Dreams. Mr. Zhang came in every morning for his soy latte and almond croissant, and over the years we had developed a friendly relationship. One morning, as I served him his usual order, he mentioned the upcoming bid. "Your father-in-law's company is the favorite," he said casually. "But between you and me, I'm concerned about some rumors I've been hearing about their business practices." I kept my expression neutral. "Oh," Mr. Zhang nodded, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "Particularly their treatment of smaller businesses. In this economic climate, that kind of predatory behavior doesn't look good." I didn't say anything, just listened as he continued. "It would be a shame if someone could provide documentation of such practices. The committee takes ethics very seriously." Later that day, I met with my network of business owners. Each had their own story of Gerald's tactics, the threats, the manipulated contracts, the financial bullying. More importantly, many had kept records. Within a week, a thick folder of evidence found its way to Mr. Zhang's office. Everything was properly documented, legally obtained, and devastating in its thoroughness. The day Matthews International lost the bid, Gerald finally figured it out. I was at Sweet Dreams, now thriving with a line out the door, when he burst in. His face was purple with rage, his carefully maintained composure completely shattered. "You," he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at me. "This was all you. The shipping contract, Continental, all of it." The cafe went silent, customers watching with wide eyes. I stayed behind the counter, calm and collected. "Can I help you with something, Gerald?" "Don't play innocent," he spat. "You've been systematically undermining my business for months. Morning Glory, the supplier changes, the bid. It was all you." I smiled then, not bothering to deny it. "Impressive detective work. Though I have to admit, it took you longer to figure it out than I expected." He slammed his hands on the counter, making cups rattle. "You think this is funny? You have no idea what you've done. That contract was worth millions." "I know exactly what I've done," I said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I showed you that the gold digger you dismissed could play your game better than you. That the small business owner you tried to crush could build something stronger than your threats. That your money and power don't make you invincible." His face went from purple to white. "I'll destroy you for this." "No," I said firmly, "you won't. Because everything I did was completely legal. Just business, remember? And if you try anything, I have enough documentation of your past actions to make things very uncomfortable for Matthews International." He stared at me, and for the first time, I saw something new in his eyes. Respect mixed with fear. "Now," I continued, "I have customers to serve. Would you like to order something, or are you just here to make a scene?" Gerald straightened his tie, trying to recover his dignity. Without another word, he turned and walked out. As the door closed behind him, the cafe erupted in applause. Later that evening, as I was closing up, Richard came by. He had kept his distance during everything, respecting my wish to handle it myself. "I heard what happened with Dad today," he said, helping me wipe down tables. "The story's all over the business district." I paused in my cleaning. "Are you angry?" He shook his head, pulling me into a hug. "I'm proud of you. You didn't just beat him at his own game, you showed him a better way to play it." Epilogue. 6 months later, Sweet Dreams had expanded to 3 locations. Morning Glory Catering was officially registered under my name, serving dozens of corporate clients, including, yes, Matthews International. Gerald couldn't fire us without admitting defeat, and his employees would have revolted anyway. More importantly, my network of small business owners had grown into a formal alliance, providing support and resources to others facing similar challenges. We called it the Community Business Coalition, and it became known as a force for positive change in the local business scene. Gerald and I maintained a cool but professional relationship. He never apologized for what he did, but he never tried to interfere with my businesses again either. Sometimes when he comes into Sweet Dreams for his morning coffee, he switched from the expensive place down the street. I catch him looking around with something like admiration. I keep the bank statement from that day he drained my account framed in my office. Not as a reminder of the pain or anger, but as proof that sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemy. It's about building something stronger than they ever imagined you could. And every morning, when I unlock the doors to Sweet Dreams and smell the fresh coffee brewing, I smile knowing that I didn't just survive Gerald's attempt to break me, I turned it into the foundation of something beautiful.